You know that feeling you get when you turn onto your street? When your tires bump onto the familiar landscape, that means you're home. After a long day, traveling, work, school, there's nothing quite like pulling into your own driveway or walking up to your own front door. Often there's a sense of security we feel in our own homes, on our street, in our own neighborhood. We feel secure that we know our neighbors, that we can trust them. We open our doors to them, happy to share an extra couple eggs or some sugar. We invite them into our backyards for barbecues or birthday parties. This was how Oak Hollow Drive was, a small street with only a few houses located in Bryan, Texas. The close-knit neighbors threw block parties, barbecues, and socials. But in 2007, 2 murders on the same street shattered the neighborhood's sense of security and left residents wondering what evil might lurk behind the closed doors of Oak Hollow Drive. Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 23 of the Darklivity podcast. I'm your host, Kimbyr, and I'm here with my co-host, my biggest supporter, my best friend, and he's a new dad to our brand new baby girl, Jonathan.
Hi, Darklivity. It's the dark downward slope into the degradation of the human mind and the consequences that such darkness brings to light.
Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe, hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on one of our episodes. And thank you so much for all of your patience and support. And a lot of you have asked, is the baby here? And the answer is yes. She was about 4 weeks early before her due date. And her name is Mazzy Amara. She entered the world determined to be a Gemini, like her mama. So thank you all for your patience and support and love. She's in the next room. We're actually watching her through a monitor right now on our iPad. Yeah. It's been a crazy couple weeks, I can tell you that.
It's cool. This is my first child, and it has invoked this feeling in me. It's like a newfound sense of purpose.
Yeah, you know? It is. I mean, she's just so amazing. I'm sure if you're a parent, you'll understand that it's like a weird love, like I was telling you. It's like a protective love, and she's just beautiful. We'll put some pictures up on the screen. We've also been documenting everything on our Instagrams. You can find them below as well. And one other thing is, it is a little bit hard for me to talk, so I'm doing my best. So if you hear me struggling, you're probably hearing me struggle.
I tried to tell her we can wait, but she was determined to continue.
It makes me feel good to get on a routine again. So I want to be upfront about this case and tell you that it is a little complicated. There are multiple victims and perpetrators, but we're going to make it as easy as we can to follow. And I'm going to introduce you to Mrs. Etta Jean Beasley Westbrook. Let me just say that I did a lot of research on Etta Jean for this case. I listened to interviews with her family and other community members. I read profiles about her, and I looked at all of her beautiful paintings. And the more I researched, the more amazed and impressed I became with this woman. Etta Jean was a sweet, older lady, but she was also a burning flame of life and energy. And it kind of angers me that some people can be ageist and they don't want to hear cases that involve, well, more mature individuals. But think of this as someone like your own mother, your grandmother, or another family member. This case is just as important and as evil. And I really hope that that stigma of someone's murder not being as important, because maybe they're not young or like a college student, I hope we can break that stigma. A life is definitely a life. And Etta Jean was living life to the fullest, and she really did it all. Learning about Etta Jean brought her to life for me, and I found her to be such an inspiring example of passion for people and her steadfast faith in God and for life itself. Etta Jean's daughter said it best when she said that her mother loved life, she loved people, she would talk to anyone, and whatever she did, it was done with passion. Etta Jean Beasley Westbrook, sometimes called Eddie or Jean by her friends, was a Christmas baby born December 28th in 1938 in Waynesboro, Mississippi. In 1978, she and her husband Cecil moved from Mississippi to Bryan, Texas. Now, Bryan at the time was a small city in central Texas. It was a very close-knit community, the kind of place where you knew your neighbors and you recognized people around the town. The water tower in Bryan reads The Good Life, Texas style. And that's exactly what Etta Jean and Cecil were hoping for when they moved. The Good Life. The pair lived in a quaint ranch-style home on Oak Hollow Drive. The brick house had a picture window, 3 single-story columns, and a 2-car garage. And over the years, Etta and Cecil filled this home with memories, figures, plates, and collectibles, decorating their home with solid wood furniture. And everywhere you went, you saw a family photo. This was evidence of a life well lived. Randy, one of Etta Jean's sons, said that she really loved their home, their neighborhood, and Bryan, Texas. In Bryan, Etta Jean and Cecil raised 3 children, 2 sons, Curtis and Randy, and a daughter, Deborah. Deborah recalled fondly how seriously Etta Jean had taken her role as a homemaker. She said, Mama used to get up and cook for Daddy at 4 o'clock in the morning, biscuits, sausage, and eggs before he went to work. But Etta Jean's caring spirit wasn't just reserved for her family. Her friends described her as full of sparkle, bright spirit, and joy in horrible times. One of her friends, Karen Lutke, remarked on how energetic, active, hardworking, and positive Etta Jean always was. She was also kind to her neighbors on Oak Hollow Drive. Kirsten Mabry, the granddaughter of Etta Jean's across-the-street neighbor, Geraldine Lloyd, said Miss Etta was a friend my grandmother could rely on.
Etta Jean was also very involved in the Bryan community. Her Christian faith was extremely important to her, and she was active in her church, the Central Baptist Church. She attended service every Sunday, participated in Sunday school classes, and belonged to a regular Bible study group. She was also a member of the Brazos Valley Art League and a frequent volunteer with Brazos County Republican Party. Etta Jean's fire for life continued at home. She loved gardening, cooking, pottery, and painting. She was actually a talented painter. She painted bucolic landscapes and portraits. One friend even said the portraits were so lifelike they almost seemed to breathe. She also built a pottery studio in her garage, complete with a kiln, and would throw and fire her own ceramics. Etta's generous and passionate spirit was absolutely remarkable given her challenges she faced at home. In the late 90s, her husband Cecil became very sick with emphysema. For over 10 years, Etta Jean nursed and cared for him until he ultimately passed away in 2006. But even after his passing, Etta Jean stayed active and, most importantly, stayed positive. She even joined a single seniors group at her church. On Sunday, June 3rd, 2007, Etta Jean woke and did what she always did on Sundays. She had breakfast, got ready, and went to Central Baptist Church for Sunday service. After the service, a few of her friends invited her out to lunch at Fazoli's. But Etta Jean decided she wanted to stay home and cook a lunch for herself. She got home around noon, she walked to the kitchen, got some chicken out of the fridge. She called her younger son Randy, hoping to catch up, but she left a voicemail around 1 p.m.
Hey Randy, it's Mom, just got home, give me a call.
Tragically, this voicemail was the last time Randy ever heard his sweet mother's voice. The next day, on Monday, June 4th, 2007, Officer Dean Schwartzlander responded to an automatic 911 call made by Etta Jean's alarm system. The system also automatically called Etta Jean's emergency contact, her best friend, Hazel Ogden. The two arrived at Etta Jean's house on Oak Hollow Drive early in the morning, and Officer Schwartzlander reassured Hazel that police all over Bryan had spent the last several hours responding to similar calls. There was a major thunderstorm in the city that night, and the storm had triggered several alarm systems. Most of the calls had been easily resolved, with no signs of break-ins or foul play. After knocking on the front door and checking the house for any signs of disturbance, Officer Schwartzlander was convinced that the situation was no different at Etta Jean's home. The storm had probably falsely triggered her alarm system. It didn't even seem like Etta Jean was home, but Hazel wasn't convinced. She noticed that Etta Jean's car was still in the driveway. She asked Schwartzlander if they could check around the back of the house. When the two looked through one of the windows, Hazel saw the container of raw chicken left out on the kitchen counter. And immediately, she knew something was wrong. The Etta Jean she knew would have never left food out like that. She asked the officer to break down the door. But when he tried opening the back door, he found that it was unlocked, and the two entered the home.
When they entered, they found 68-year-old Etta Jean lying face down on the floor, deceased. Hazel said, "God has been very kind to me, and I don't remember very much. I saw Jean lying there, and I remember thinking, her hair is wet. Why would her hair be wet? The wetness, Hazel saw, was a pool of blood surrounding Etta Jean's head. Officer Swartzlander called him back up and several more Bryan police officers arrived to investigate the scene. Etta Jean was lying face down on the living room carpet, her left hand in a fist by her head and her right arm in hand beneath her body. Initially, officers thought maybe Etta Jean had taken her own life, but when they moved her, they saw that her hand underneath her body was not holding a gun. However, police still didn't rule out Etta Jean's death as a homicide. Etta Jean was older, and there was no signs of struggle in the house. No broken windows, no kicked-in doors, no overturned furniture. They thought maybe this was all a terrible, terrible accident. While officers remained on the scene preparing to send Etta Jean's body to Austin for an autopsy, a car pulled up, screeching to a halt in Etta Jean's front lawn. A middle-aged man ran out of the car and attempted to enter the home. Officers barred his entry and began to question him. He was 41-year-old Curtis Westbrook, Etta Jean's youngest son. He lived in Dallas, and he said he had been driving 3 hours straight to Etta Jean's home when he heard the news. While officers were still unsure whether a crime had occurred, they requested Curtis's DNA just in case, and he provided.
Unfortunately, the autopsy soon revealed that Etta Jean's death was indeed a homicide. And I want you to brace yourself. The details provided in this autopsy paint a picture of an extremely brutal murder. The autopsy determined that Etta Jean had been struck in the head 25 times with a blunt object. It was most likely metal because there were fragments of a reddish metal in some of the wounds. The bludgeoning caused heavy bloodshed, which soaked Etta Jean's hair and streaked down her arms. Her skull was cracked and her skin torn from the force of the blows. The chief medical examiner of Travis County, Dr. David Dolanak, said the blows were so severe as to cause significant bruising and bleeding to her brain. But that wasn't all. Etta Jean's larynx was broken, and whoever killed her had strangled her after beating her. There were defensive wounds on her as well. They were on her hands and her arms. Etta Jean tried to defend herself, but she could never stand a chance against such a ferocious attack. The thought of someone stealing the life of this beautiful, kind woman is heartbreaking. But then to hear that she was killed so viciously is truly beyond comprehension. I can't bear to think of the vibrant Etta Jean just annihilated when she still had so much life to live. While the officers began their investigation, Etta Jean's shocked and heartbroken family came together to mourn the loss of their beloved matriarch. Etta Jean's memorial service was held on Friday, June 8th, 2007, at Etta's Central Baptist Church in Bryan. She was laid to rest at the White House Cemetery in her hometown of Waynesboro, Mississippi.
Meanwhile, officers returned to Etta Jean's home, now treating it like a crime scene. Brian Bell, a supervisor of Bryan Police Homicide Department, led the investigation. The team covered all the windows and doors to make the home dark in order to use Blue Star. Blue Star, as I'm sure most of you know, but don't feel bad if you don't, is a substance often used in crime scene investigations because it activates, turning an eerie glowing blue at the slightest trace of blood. Blue Star will often illuminate in areas where someone has attempted to clean blood away. When the officers applied Blue Star to Etta Jean's living room and kitchen, the scene lit up. There was blood cast-off droplets that may have sprayed out during the attack on the walls and ceiling. There were smears around the room where someone had evidently tried to clean up the blood. There were several large droplets of blood in the kitchen, forming a trail that led to the living room. It appears that whoever murdered Etta Jean had first attacked her in the kitchen, followed her into the living room, and killed her there on the carpet. Police also found and bagged several other crucial pieces of evidence. There were hairs in the kitchen, blood droplets in Etta Jean's sink, as if someone tried to wash their hands, and a bit of reddish metal on the carpet. There were also some cleaning supplies and bleach on the back porch. And the last piece of evidence they collected was Etta Jean's answering machine.
Unfortunately, in violent crimes like this, the victim often knows the perpetrator. So officers began their investigation with the family. The only one of Etta Jean's family members who lived in state was 41-year-old Curtis Westbrook, Etta Jean's youngest son. And his alibi was weak. He also came to the crime scene. So Curtis said that he had been at home in Dallas during the time of the murder, but he was home alone, so there was no one to corroborate his statements. And Curtis said that anyone who knew him personally would know that he would not do this to his mother. He said that he was her protector, that he wanted her to live her life to the fullest, and that she deserved to live her life. But talk is cheap, and the officers subpoenaed Curtis's phone records to assess whether he truly had been in Dallas. And thankfully for Curtis, his phone records backed up his statements. They showed that he was in Dallas for the entire 48 hours leading up to Etta Jean's murder. The officers then followed up on another theory. When they searched Etta Jean's computer, they found an online dating site in her internet history. They wondered, could Etta Jean have met someone online after Cecil's death? And could someone that she met have done this to her? But Curtis cleared this up. He said he was the one that accessed a dating site from his mom's computer the last time he visited. He said his mom could barely figure out how to work her email, and there was no way she was going to be on a dating site. The officers then turned to the neighbors on Oak Hollow Drive. Between the autopsy results and the voicemail that Etta Jean left Randy at 1 p.m., there was a very small window in which this crime could have occurred. The autopsy estimated the time of death between 1 p.m. and 2 p.m., and the cops knew for sure from the voicemail that Etta had been alive and well at 1 p.m. So surely, if anything happened to Etta Jean in broad daylight on this small, tight-knit street, one of her neighbors would have seen something. Now, the officers were not able to speak with the Lloyds. Those were the neighbors that lived directly across the street because their house appeared empty at the time. However, the neighbors they were able to contact had seen nothing. No one had seen anyone suspicious enter or leave Etta Jean's house. No one had seen any suspicious vehicles either. So the officers were baffled. How could a killer enter and exit a house in the middle of the afternoon without anyone seeing them?
Still hoping to find a lead, investigators brought Etta Jean's sons into her house. They hoped that Curtis and Randy's familiarity with the home might help them spot something that the police had missed. And right away, Randy noticed something amiss in the garage. The railroad spike that usually propped open Etta Jean's pottery kiln was missing. Randy explained to the police that the kiln's lid had broken. So Etta Jean had been using an old railroad spike of Cecil's to keep the lid open. Luckily, the railroad spike was part of a pair. When the police tested the second spike stored in the toolbox in Etta Jean's garage, the metal of the spike matched the reddish metal flakes found on Etta Jean's carpet and in her head wounds. Police believe they now knew what the murder weapon was. Walking inside the house, Curtis and Randy also noticed that Etta Jean's purse was underneath the twin bed in the spare bedroom. They said that this was very unusual, and they would never have known their mother to put her purse there. And sure enough, when the police searched the purse, they found that Etta Jean's wallet was missing. When they checked her answering machine, there was also a message from Etta Jean's credit card company alerting her of possible fraudulent charges. This was it. The police believed that if they could find the person using Etta Jean's credit cards, they would find their murderer. Things began to move fast.
Police said that as soon as the credit card companies learned that they were dealing with a homicide, they very quickly supplied law enforcement with the exact vendors and the timestamps for all of the charges that occurred after Etta Jean's estimated time of death. Tellingly, one of the first charges was for cleaning supplies. There were charges at an H-E-B, a Target, and a Walmart. There's always a Walmart. Do you ever notice that? There needs to be a shirt that says, "There's always a Walmart." But I think it's because typically Walmart stay open late and they have a ton of locations and they have cleaning supplies and all kinds of things you would need. Like shovels, garbage bags, bleach.
Duct tape.
But finally, later in the night, on the day of the murder, there was a charge for a motel room. The fraudulent transactions totaled just under $1,500, and that's a pretty significant amount. So police visited the stores in Bryan and College Station, and managers showed them video footage based on the timestamps that were provided by the credit card companies. And repeatedly, in video after video, they saw the same young man. And in a few videos, he was accompanied by an older female. Finally, the investigators got their break when one of the cashiers said they recognized the man in the footage. They'd gone to high school together. The cashier said it was 19-year-old Christian Olsen. So police immediately went to Christian Olsen's residence. However, when his parents opened the door, they told officers that Christian hadn't lived with them for quite some time. Now Christian lived with the Lloyds on Oak Hollow Drive. That's right. Christian Olsen lived in Geraldine Lloyd's house right across the street from Etta Jean. The pieces were all starting to come together, and the police knew they needed to bring Christian in immediately.
So they obtained a warrant for Christian's arrest for theft based on the in-store videos. Police then set up a monitor outside of Christian's home on Oak Hollow Drive and waited. Finally, Christian emerged, accompanied by the older female officers had seen in some of the security footage. Officers arrested them both, placing Christian and the unidentified female in their patrol cars and driving them to the station for questioning. Christian, dressed in a t-shirt and shorts, appeared relatively calm as the officers arrested him. But then again, this wasn't his first time being arrested. Christian had a long history with Bryan police, but let's go back in time a bit and we'll tell you what they discovered about him. As a young boy, Christian's mother described him as active and gregarious. His ex-girlfriend from middle school, Melissa Cifuentes, remembered him as really smart. The type of kid who was good at everything he tried, sports or school. He played soccer and went to church every Sunday. But then, when Christian was around 14, according to his parents, things started to change. There had been small stuff before, some lies when he was younger, petty theft at 12. But at 14, Christian's parents said he stopped spending time with his family, stopped going to church, and started getting into trouble regularly.
As a mom, I fear this. My oldest daughter is about to be 13, so let me know in the comments if you saw any changes in your kids around this age. I know for me, I started to rebel at exactly 14. I don't know what it was, but I wanted to do things on my own. I wanted to have secretive, friends that I didn't think my parents would approve of. What about you?
I started to distance myself even more from my parents because of their intense punitive behavior towards me.
Oh, that's interesting.
And I began figuring out how to live life from my friends.
That's interesting because as we go forward, you'll know why I say that's interesting.
But I wouldn't change a thing about my past. Love you, Mom and Dad. I love who I've become. But let's get back to Christian. Christian's mom said he had always been a talker and was always open with his activities and his friends. He all of a sudden became more secretive and was on the phone very late at night.
See, he became secretive. That's how I was. I didn't want my parents to know who I was talking to, and I wonder why.
Me too. It was around this time when Christian was arrested for the first time for theft and felony credit card abuse. However, he was put on a conditional release program, allowed to return home and be with his parents. But Christian violated the terms of his release when he stole his parents' car. They placed him on formal probation with an ankle monitor. Christian then violated this probation in several ways. He cut off his ankle monitor, violated his curfew, and was found with a prohibited cell phone. He stole money from his mom's purse, and all of this landed him in a juvenile boot camp facility. There were positive reports of Christian's growth while he was in boot camp, but when he returned, he reverted back to his old ways. He once again violated probation by skipping school and cutting off his ankle monitor. Finally, out of options, Christian was sent to complete his probation at Miracle Farm. It's a residential outreach facility for at-risk boys, where he completed high school before his release in December of 2004.
You went to military school.
I sure did, 7th and 8th grade.
So it was very similar.
All
they
boys.
had to send him away because cutting off his ankle monitor, to me, that's so extreme. I don't know. I've never worn an ankle monitor, but I'm guessing that's not just careful, snip of a scissor, but you have to dismantle it or something. But what do you do as a parent? Because you did mention, you thought that maybe your parents were to blame for some of your behaviors, but so many people do want to place blame on the parents. But it seemed like they tried, they were doing different things, but we don't know because we don't see behind the scenes of exactly what's going on.
In my experience, I realized one thing I missed while growing up was having someone who was understanding and willing to listen. Instead of always punishing me, they're like, why do you do these things?
Gotcha. Because then the kid feels like, okay, you don't care. You just don't want me to do the thing you don't like. So I can see that would be, I don't know, that would make me feel alienated, I guess.
Right. I think being present and open and communicative and above all else, showing unconditional love and understanding is extremely conducive to a healthy upbringing.
Well, here's a professional's opinion because we are not professionals, even though it's okay to have an opinion. We've lived enough life where we can look at something and say, okay, I think this might be what's going on.
I have lived my own life, totally.
Yes. But while Christian was in the care of Brazos County Juvenile Services, he saw a psychologist. And this psychologist, Michelle Fakawas, believed that Christian's behavior was the result of emerging antisocial personality disorder. She noted his history of lying, resisting limits, and rejecting social norms for age-appropriate behavior. She also noted that he did not appear to feel remorse for his actions, only regret at being caught. Now, you may be wondering, like I was, what causes a teenager to develop antisocial personality disorder? Well, the exact cause in teens is unknown. It's not what we want to hear, but it's unknown. But it is thought to be a combination of genetics and environmental factors. So what that means is it's partially genes and their life experiences. So if their parents had any mental health concerns, and if the child was exposed to trauma, whether that was emotional or otherwise growing up, this could be the reason that they're developing these behaviors. The signs that you would want to look for are impulsivity, irresponsibility, lack of regard for others' rights and safety, frequent fighting, lying, cheating, and other deceitful behaviors. They also have difficulty following the law or authority, manipulating others, and a lack of remorse. What's difficult is, like many other personality disorders, antisocial personality disorder is a chronic condition that cannot be cured. But the symptoms can be managed with professional help and the support from family members. Treatment may include talk therapy, for example, but what's tough is if a teen is suffering, they might not think they have a problem. So they might be opposed to getting help. And I guess a parent could try to force it, but that would be difficult. What are you going to drag your teenager by the ear?
Send you to military school.
Well, yeah, send you to military school. But in Christian's case, after his release from Miracle Farms, when he was 18 years old, he moved out of his parents' home and into Geraldine Lloyd's house on Oak Hollow Drive. So at this point, he's an adult. He's able to make his own decisions.
I'm glad my parents sent me to military school. It did
Really?
kick my butt. Yeah.
Even though it was hard?
Oh, I hated it.
But looking back, you like the regiment,
The thing is, I think that everyone, when you get into something, you kind of, it breaks you down. In a sense, you're like, I can get through it. And then you learn to like the thing you didn't.
Yeah.
It's kind of like Stockholm Syndrome in a sense.
Do you remember that show on MTV that was they would shock the kids? Not Scare Factor, but they'd be they would come in, the kid didn't go to bed on time. And be like,
Scared Straight?
yes, that's it. Scared Straight. They would come in, they're like, what? And all the military people, we can put on a clip on the screen, but I was like, oh, and I would be so scared that was going to happen. My grandmother was going to send in the Scared Straight people. But going back to the case, recall that Christian had dated Melissa Cifuentes. That's Geraldine's granddaughter. So they dated when he was younger, and Melissa still lived with her grandma. Now, Christian hung around the house a lot. Even when he and Melissa broke up, he would spend time with Melissa and her mom, Kelly, who also lived there. When he left his parents' house, the Lloyds welcomed him into their home on Oak Hollow Drive, the home that Christian had just been taken from in a police cruiser. Once Christian and the older female, who the police soon identified as Melissa's mom, Kelly Cifuentes, arrived at the police station, officers placed them in separate interrogation rooms and began to ask them questions. Now, Christian was seated in a small chair facing the two detectives. He admitted to using Etta Jean's credit cards, but he said he found them in a gutter by her home. He denied doing anything to harm Etta. Now, Detective Daryl Fix, he told Christian, I'm going to give you the opportunity to shoot straight with me, man. Tell me what else happened when you're at Etta Jean's house. Tell me. Now, at this point, Christian began to cry, and the police pressed him again, asking him why this happened, what he had done, and why he did what he did. Through tears, he said that he didn't know. They asked if Etta Jean had ever done anything to him and asked, why would you hurt her? And he just said, I'm a fucked up person and I deserve to be in jail for the rest of my life. Wow. I was not expecting that.
Christian then explained how he committed the murder. Christian knew, just like everyone in the neighborhood did, how kind and generous Etta Jean was. And in a cruelly calculated ruse, he used that fact against her. The previous day, to create a pretense for entering her house later, Christian asked Etta Jean to borrow a baking pan. He had an identical pan, so there was no reason for him to need Etta Jean's. Then, the next day, when he saw her pull into her garage returning from church, He seized his chance. He entered Etta Jean's house through the open garage door with the baking pan he planned to return. As he passed through the garage, he grabbed the railroad spike from the pottery kiln. He then entered Etta Jean's house and violently attacked her in the kitchen, striking her head with a heavy metal spike. However, after this, Christian said everything became murkier. He said, quote, "I don't remember. I mean, it's like from the start I just blacked out, and then after all this happened in front of me, I don't remember what happened in between." End quote. But he did remember what happened after the murder. After he killed Etta Jean, he took her wallet and he hid her purse. He had sustained a cut on his hand during the attack, so he went to Etta Jean's sink and washed the cut. This explained the blood police found in the sink earlier, and when police tested the DNA in the blood and Christian's DNA, they were a match. Christian then threw away the railroad spike, which he referred to as merely a piece of metal. Officers would later search the local landfill for the spike, but they were unable to ever find it. Detectives said that for a brief moment during the confession, Christian did seem remorseful, but soon after, he returned to a cold, unfeeling demeanor. The police placed Christian under arrest for the murder of Etta Jean Westbrook.
Yeah, and he was most likely acting and didn't actually care about Etta Jean or what he had done. It was probably just self-preservation at this point, and this should have been it. The police had their confession. Christian had murdered Etta Jean in cold blood, so he could go on a shopping spree with their credit cards. Case closed. But something wasn't adding up. Namely, where 36-year-old Kelly Cifuentes fit into all of this. The police had Kelly in another interrogation room, and she claimed that she had no idea Christian had stolen the credit cards. She thought he was using cards that his parents had given to him, and when the police told Kelly that Christian confessed to the murder of Etta Jean, Kelly said, "I feel sick. I just want to vomit when I think about that." But the police were not buying it. Kelly was visibly uncomfortable. She was constantly moving around, crossing and uncrossing her arms and legs and rocking back and forth in her chair. She was running her hands through her hair, covering her face. She looked like someone who knew more than they were letting on. So the detectives pressed her, saying in reference to Etta Jean that this poor woman did not die an easy death. But Kelly continued to claim that she had no idea about the stolen cards or Etta Jean's murder. The police had no choice but to release her, but they still suspected there was something suspicious going on with Kelly Cifuentes. Oh, and you just wait. Because to fully understand Kelly, we do need to start at the beginning. And this is always my favorite part, getting to know who these people are and where they came from. And Kelly Cifuentes grew up in a stable, loving home with her two sisters, her mom, and her dad. They lived in the suburbs and attended the local public school. Their dad worked a steady job, and their mom stayed home to raise them. It was a picture-perfect childhood. Kelly loved to dance, go to concerts, and her favorite band as a kid was Kiss. From a young age, perhaps because of her own mom's example, Kelly always wanted to grow up to be a wife and a homemaker. So when she met Felix Cifuentes in her senior year of high school, she felt like her dream was coming true. The two married just 3 months later. And shortly after that, Kelly gave birth to their first child, Melissa Cifuentes. And by all accounts, the couple was very happy. Felix owned and operated a successful plumbing company that made enough money for Kelly to stay home and raise Melissa. Kelly and Felix were financially comfortable and very much in love. Plumbing is actually a pretty lucrative business if you do it right. People sometimes think that it's a dirty job, but it can pay very well. And in this instance, they were comfortable. Kelly's sister said that it was a really good marriage and that the couple was really thrilled to have their little girl, Melissa. They were even more happy when they welcomed their second child, Kevin, on October 26, 2000. Even with the second child, though, Kelly and her daughter, Melissa, remained extremely close. Family members said that the two of them seemed more like best friends than mother and daughter. And Melissa remembered it the same way. She said that her mother's goal was to, quote, always make her happy and just be the best mom she could be. It was like I had a mom and a best friend all in one, end quote. But then something happened that shattered their happy family and broke Kelly. Out partying one night, Felix, Kelly's husband, inappropriately touched a 16-year-old girl and was sent to prison. And the ripple effects of this action would be felt for years to come by so many innocent people.
But when Felix was arrested, Kelly's financial situation changed overnight. Broke, betrayed, and devastated, she had to move back in with her mother, Geraldine Lloyd, bringing her 2 children, Melissa and Kevin, with her. Melissa remembered how hard this transition was for everyone. Geraldine, her grandmother, suffered from depression, and Kelly had just experienced a shocking upheaval in her life. The two fought frequently. Kelly's whole family noticed how, after Felix's arrest, Kelly began to spiral, engaging in increasingly problematic behavior. Kelly's niece, Kirsten Mabry, said that she thought Kelly wanted to forget what was going on in the real world. She wanted to escape reality. She said that Felix going to prison let loose a completely different Kelly. This new Kelly spent increasing amounts of time with Melissa and her friends, acting much more like a teenager than a mother or a role model. She purchased alcohol for the kids, often drinking with them late into the night, and she began to build a close relationship with one of Melissa's friends, in particular, Christian Olsen.
Now I'm drawing a blank on another case that had a similar undertone, but it was an older guy. He was doing all the same stuff. He would buy them alcohol. This is on my main channel. It's actually the Anderson Family Murders. The same thing. He would buy alcohol for these teenage girls. He would act cool. Like he was the cool older adult. And I think something's definitely off with people who hang out with teenagers when they're grown-ass adults. But that's just my opinion.
What's weirder here is that Christian Olsen's relationship with the Cifuentes family began when he dated Melissa in junior high. It wasn't very serious. They mostly just hung out around the house. But when the two broke up, Christian didn't stop hanging around the house. Christian was 14 years old. Kelly Cifuentes was 36.
Yeah, that's weird. Very weird. It was her daughter's boyfriend. And then she's hanging out with him? What the hell? That's just weird.
Right, but Kelly said she thought Christian needed a role model and a confidant.
And Kelly thought that she would be a good role model. Right. I think this was an excuse to not make it look like what it really was.
And it was at this time when Christian had started to get into trouble, and Kelly wanted to be there for him, help guide him. In the beginning, family members, and especially Melissa, found this relationship to be very strange. But Kelly was careful. There was no evidence of a sexual relationship, so the Cifuentes family, Kirsten, Geraldine, and Melissa, weren't exactly sure how to handle the fact that the two of them were spending so much time together.
Now, I know this isn't normally how we go about telling stories. We usually reveal things in the order in which they happened, but we don't really want to let this woman's lies go on without being talked about for even the span of a couple minutes.
Exactly. So, in 2009, years and years after the fact, Kelly finally admitted that there was a sexual relationship with Christian.
Wow.
And that it actually began when he was only 14.
14. She was 36. He was her daughter's ex-boyfriend. Let that sink in for a moment, because no matter what you think of Christian Olsen, he was indisputably a victim of Kelly Cifuentes. This is not going to excuse Christian's actions in any way, because what he did to Etta Jean was horrific and inexcusable. But it does begin to paint a picture of Christian's state of mind, of what might have driven him to such evil.
While there may not have been evidence of Christian and Kelly's sexual relationship when Christian was a minor, but that didn't stop Christian's parents from trying to intervene. They knew Christian better than anyone, and they knew that there was something wrong, even if there was no definitive proof.
Right, and recall that I asked what a parent could do. And we spoke previously about how Christian's behavior began to take a dramatic turn for the worse when he was 14. Well, Christian's parents felt sure that this shift in behavior was due, at least in part, to his relationship with Kelly Cifuentes, which began around the same time, and it had to have had an effect on him. But at first, like the Cifuentes family, Christian's parents merely found the relationship to be baffling, never imagining that a 36-year-old mother of Melissa, who they knew, could be preying on their 14-year-old son. But then they saw some flirtatious text messages between Kelly and Christian. Oh my gosh, I would go crazy if this was my kid. And once again, not enough to incriminate Kelly, but enough to make a parent's skin crawl, enough to alert them that all was not normal between their son and Kelly Cifuentes. Now, after Christian's parents discovered the text, they tried to keep the two apart. They used every card in the parent playbook. They took Christian's phone away. So you know what happened? Kelly bought him a new one. Convenient. So they grounded Christian, and Kelly drove by their house in the middle of the night and would pass him fast food through his bedroom window. They even forbid him from seeing Kelly, and that just caused Christian to run away to Kelly's house. And when the Olsen parents went to the Lloyd house and demanded to see their own son, Kelly would not let them inside. Yeah. That's like kidnapping. I mean, he's a minor. So, of course, these poor parents who felt completely helpless reported this relationship to the juvenile authorities. And while a note was added to Christian's file, authorities said that without any proof, there wasn't anything they could do.
I'm sorry, this girl has my son hostage, even though he wants to be there, but that's not proof.
He's a little boy.
What?
What do you mean? They didn't have like ring cameras and like proof that he was going in there and just, I don't know.
Well, as you can tell, Kelly was determined. She wasn't going to let anyone keep her away from Christian. She even called Christian's school and managed to make herself the primary adult, the point of contact on his file. This way, when Christian skipped school to spend time with her, she would get the truancy calls and she could write the excuse note, cutting Christian's parents completely out of the process.
Wow, that's so manipulative. I cannot imagine the hurt and the fear and the frustration that Christian's parents felt. To watch your son transforming before your eyes, to feel that you know exactly why it's happening and not to be able to stop it. It must be just absolutely heartbreaking.
Then when Christian turned 18, he and Kelly were actually able to be much more open about their relationship because it was legal now. No need to hide it. Christian was an adult. So Christian moved in with the Lloyds, and the criminal behavior Christian had exhibited as a juvenile only picked up. When he moved in with his abuser from 2004 to 2007, Christian was convicted of evading arrest, theft by check, forgery of a financial instrument, and theft of property. He also had 2 unadjudicated offenses of driving with an invalid license, and most notably, on one occasion, Christian had even stolen from Etta Jean Westbrook, stealing her credit cards when entering her house under the false pretense of needing to use the phone.
Well, so much for Kelly being a great mentor and role model. Melissa, Kelly's daughter, said that at this point, everyone knew about Christian and Kelly's relationship. They just didn't want to say anything. Can you imagine your mom's dating your ex-boyfriend that's only 14? It's not funny. I'm just like so disgusted. Ugh. She said she felt betrayed and she wondered how her mom can do something like this. And meanwhile, Christian's mom, Rebecca Olsen, still tried to stay in Christian's life. She didn't want to give up on her son. So occasionally she would bring him groceries, and she even felt hopeful that Christian was turning his life around when he finally got a job. But he was arrested for Etta Jean's murder on the first day of work. Kirsten Mabry may have put it the best when she said, quote, "My aunt and Christian fed off each other. They were like fire and gasoline," end quote. While family and other members of the community might have had their suspicions about Kelly and Christian's relationship, law enforcement did not learn of it until they brought Christian back in to the interrogation room to question him again. Now this time for a different murder on Oak Hollow Drive. This second gruesome murder, one that the police had not even known to look for, was first revealed by an anonymous email. The email told police that Geraldine Lloyd, Kelly's mom, was buried in her own backyard. What? I know. I have never heard of anything like this. It's wild. The email was followed by a phone call from none other than Felix Cifuentes. That's Kelly's estranged husband. Now, Felix had recently been released from prison, and he was out on parole living in Waco, Texas. Since his release, he had began speaking to Kelly and his children again on the phone, and in a recent phone conversation, according to Felix, Kelly decided to unburden herself. And she told Felix she couldn't hold on to the secret anymore. She said Christian had murdered Geraldine and that Geraldine was buried in their backyard. Wow. This is weird. It's a lot.
Let's tell you more about Geraldine Lloyd. She lived at 3505 Oak Hollow Drive for more than 30 years, raising her family and building a life there. She was a loving, devoted wife, mother, and grandmother. In 2007, Geraldine was a widow. Her husband, Charles Edwin Lloyd, died in 2002. Prior to his death, the couple raised 2 daughters together, Cindy Mabry and Kelly Cifuentes. Geraldine also had 4 grandchildren, Kirsten, Robbie, Melissa, and Kevin. When Callie fell on hard times, Geraldine opened her home to her and her children without a thought. Later, when Christian needed a place to stay, she welcomed him in too. Her house was packed, but Geraldine never shut the door on anyone. She had that in common with her neighbor, Etta Jean. Unfortunately, there are those who prey on kindness and openness, and these two loving women fell victim to the same opportunistic, brutal predator.
In response to Felix's tip, the police quickly obtained a search warrant for 3505 Oak Hollow Drive and brought dogs to the house, entering the residence at 6:30 p.m. on Friday, June 22nd, 2007. And these dogs immediately alerted to 3 spots in the backyard. 2 of the spots appeared undisturbed, so the police elected not to excavate them. However, one of the spots near the back patio looked more suspicious to police, like the ground had been disturbed at some point in the recent past. So police brought in uniformed officers, plainclothes detectives, and an excavation crew to unearth this portion of the Lloyds' backyard.
As the crew worked, the normally quiet Oak Hollow Drive devolved into chaos. The screech of jackhammers echoed for hours from the Lloyds' backyard. There were news trucks, there were police cruisers, the neighbors, who had only just begun to recover from the horrific shock of Etta Jean's murder and the arrest of Christian Olsen, came out of their houses to watch in horror as a second house on the street became a crime scene. Jennifer Orta, one resident, said, "We really want our neighborhood to get back to the quiet and peacefulness that it once was before this." With another woman on the street potentially victimized by Christian, one neighbor expressed relief that she had not been a target. In fact, Christian had asked her to borrow her bike pump, but she hadn't had one. She wondered if not having the bike pump saved her life.
Wow, that's crazy. It probably did.
Honestly.
That is really scary. And it took them 12 hours for police to fully unearth the spot the cadaver dogs had alerted to. First, detectives found 2 pillows, then a bed comforter, and then horrifically, a foot, about 3 feet under the ground. After finding the foot, they kept digging deeper and eventually discovered Geraldine Lloyd's entire body. The body was significantly decomposed, but dental records definitively identified the body as Geraldine. One of the first reporters on the scene said that seeing that hole firsthand, knowing that a 63-year-old woman had been treated like she was nothing, treated like a piece of garbage, covered up by dirt, those few seconds looking at that hole were haunting to say the least. I can't even imagine that. An autopsy was performed on Geraldine's body, which revealed that she had been dead and buried for at least 6 months. Wow. Since late January. The autopsy also proved that Geraldine had been murdered. There was evidence of blunt force trauma to her head, just like there had been in Etta Jean's murder. According to the medical examiner, someone had struck Geraldine's head so hard, they fractured the left side of her skull into nearly a dozen pieces, and it caved into her brain. Although her skin had loosened from her body since the time of her death, the examiner was still able to identify 2 large gashes that indicated at least 2 strikes to her head.
Immediately, police began to search the rest of the Lloyd residence. When investigators inspected the home, they found a gruesome scene behind a padlocked bedroom door. Police broke open the padlocked door and entered Geraldine's bedroom. There, they found the site of the murder.
Wow, so they killed her and then they locked her in a room, but then they stayed living there. They're like trying to really sweep it under the rug.
Right. The skeletons they had in their closet was on a whole nother level.
Oh my gosh.
At first glance, Geraldine's bed seemed clean, but when investigators flipped the mattress over, they found it soaked with blood and baking powder, as if someone had attempted to clean it, then just flipped it over.
They just gave up because they're lazy murderers. They just flipped over the mattress and just called it a day, locked the door. It's disgusting.
There were other signs of a shoddy, half-complete cleaning job, including a metal bowl beneath the bed with a bloody cloth in it. There was also blood splattered on the curtains and evidence that someone had attempted to use cleaning solution on other bloodstains around the room. It seemed, however, that the killer or killers in the end had just given up, sealed the room, and hoped no one ever discovered what lay behind that door.
I just want you to stop and think about this for a second. Not only was Geraldine buried in the backyard for 6 months, but the scene of her murder was preserved, locked behind a closed door. What do you think the residents of that house were thinking every time they walked past that door? And where's Grandma? Where'd Grandma go?
Right.
Like that to me is beyond my understanding. And how did they feel when they went to their backyard? I'm sure they could tell that there was grass taken out of certain areas. Like, wouldn't you put two and two together? I mean, how could anyone live like that? How could the people who did that live like that? Just knowing it doesn't make sense to me.
As officers continued investigating the home, they soon found a potential motive for Geraldine's murder and further rationale for Etta Jean's. Investigators concluded that Geraldine had been murdered for financial reasons. Credit card balances running up to $30,000 indicated that Kelly, Christian, and maybe even Melissa had been fraudulently using Geraldine's cards even before her death. Perhaps Geraldine found out, or they were getting afraid of getting caught. Or they thought they could steal even more if they killed her. After her death, Kelly and Christian wrote many bad checks in her name. The police even found a sheet of paper in the house where someone had practiced writing G's to imitate Geraldine's signature for the checks. They also spent her Social Security income before she died and after. The money appeared to run dry around the time of Etta Jean's murder. After searching the home, police also interviewed all the adult residents at the time of the murder. This included Kelly, Christian, Melissa, and Melissa's then boyfriend, Seth Becerra.
See, there were two other people living there.
Right.
They must have known that Geraldine was no longer there. So what did they think happened? And they said that Melissa was using the credit cards as well. Well, I'm just going to get right to it. While the police already suspected that Christian and Kelly knew about the murders and the body, they were horrified to learn that Melissa and Seth had known as well. Yep. In fact, Melissa and Seth both testified that they had known within hours of Geraldine's murder. Hours. They knew that she was dead. Kelly told them what happened and she begged them not to tell anyone. Seth claimed he was scared. He was dealing with what he called his own problems at the time. And that soon after this confession from Kelly, he broke up with Melissa and then severed all ties with the family. He stated that he deeply regretted not coming forward earlier about the murder. Now, Melissa not only knew about the murder, but actively participated in committing fraud and stealing from her grandmother. So I guess the apple doesn't really fall far from the tree, as they say. She admitted to using Geraldine's credit cards and checking account before and after her murder and said that she didn't say anything because she was scared that if she did, her little brother Kevin would be taken by Child Protective Services.
So next up, police questioned Christian about this murder. He repeatedly denied murdering Geraldine, and in his interview, he kept asking, "Is Kelly here in jail then?"
That's all he cared about.
Right.
He just wanted to know where Kelly was.
And while Christian did not admit to murdering Geraldine, he did reveal something major to the police in this interview. Finally, he told police about the romantic nature of his relationship with Kelly. This, coupled with the evidence that they found in Kelly's residence, convinced officers that Kelly was no innocent bystander. Though there wasn't evidence of her direct participation in the murders, officers felt certain she had been involved and were determined to prove it. It took a surprisingly long time, but 7 months after Christian was charged with Geraldine's murder on February 12, 2008, Kelly Cifuentes was indicted and arrested on the charge of criminal conspiracy to commit murder. This first-degree felony crime carried a maximum sentence of life in prison, but police did not share what evidence they had found to finally link Kelly to the death. Cindy Mabry, Kelly's sister and Geraldine's other daughter, was devastated by Kelly's arrest and said this, quote, "The thought of your mother being murdered is bad enough. My mother and my sister are my only two blood relatives on the face of this earth, and I felt like I've lost them both," end quote. Shane Phelps, the first district attorney, also attempted to bring charges against Melissa Cifuentes for false statements to the police officers, a Class B misdemeanor, and for committed acts of forgery, a state jail felony for both her lies to the police about Geraldine's whereabouts and her fraudulent use of Geraldine's credit cards. However, the state did not end up charging Melissa, preferring instead to focus on bigger fish, her mother Kelly Cifuentes, and of course Christian Olsen.
I understand, but I don't agree with that. I think anyone who's involved in something like this needs to be held accountable. But it is what it is. They had to remain steadfast in getting the main perpetrators. So on February 16, 2009, Christian's trial for the murder of Etta Jean Westbrook finally began. While Christian was not tried concurrently for the murder of Geraldine Lloyd, evidence about Geraldine's murder and her remains being found in the backyard of Christian's place of residence were permitted in court during the punishment phase of the trial. Now, just a reminder, punishment is what they call sentencing in Texas. Just wanted to point that out. The state sought the death penalty, and Christian, of course, pled not guilty. I'd also like to note that in the trial, Christian's defense attorneys wanted to prove that Christian had been the victim of sexual violation as a minor, which we know about. They claimed that Kelly had manipulated and groomed Christian and that he never would have committed the murders had she not asked him to. The prosecution, on the other hand, claimed that Christian had already started down a path of criminality before he even met Kelly, and that the sexual nature of the relationship had not impacted him, and that he was violent and financially motivated, and he would have committed these crimes whether or not he met Kelly. The trial lasted 2.5 weeks, but the portion of the trial dedicated to determining Christian's guilt lasted only 3 days. In fact, when the jury was left to deliberate, they took only 46 minutes to return a guilty verdict. However, the next portion of this trial, in which the prosecution and the defense made their arguments for whether Christian should receive the death penalty or life in prison, that lasted over another 2 weeks. Now, Christian's defense attorneys, and this was interesting, this part to me, because it's like, is he going to stay in jail? Is he going to be killed? But Christian's defense attorneys wanted to bring Donna Vandiver, who's an expert on what I'm going to refer to as female S offenders, okay? And I think we know what the S stands for, and grooming. They wanted her to testify on Christian's behalf. So Dr. Vandiver was a criminal justice expert from Texas State University who had completed her PhD dissertation on the subject of female S offenders. Now, while she had never met Kelly or Christian, she had access to Kelly's medical records and the love letters that were exchanged between the couple. For Vandiver's dissertation, she conducted a research study of over 500 female S offenders. And in this study, she identified 2 categories of them, with the most common being the nurturer. The nurturer is a female who befriends a younger victim and views her grooming as mutually beneficial rather than harmful. She perceives herself as a mentor, a role model, a teacher. Doesn't this sound familiar? So Vandiver's study also identified common characteristics of female S offenders. Usually, they're in their 30s or 40s. They're often depressed, and frequently they have suffered a recent major life stressor. Sound like anyone we've already talked about? Kelly. They're also usually suffering from depression. What's interesting to me is that Kelly and Christian's relationship started at the exact same time that Felix went to prison for the exact same type of offense. And I wondered in some twisted way if this was like her carrying out the same crime to somehow like get back at her husband. I know that sounds weird. It's probably not making sense the way I see it in my head, but it's like he did this thing.
I'm gonna get him back
with this young person. And it's not almost like you're going to get him back. It's like, I don't know, like trying to understand him.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, like I want to put myself in that same position and then maybe I can understand and justify it. I don't know. I'm not a criminal, so how would I know? Plus, at the time, she also had the stress of having to move back in with her mom. Talk about a major life stressor. I mean, to some, it wouldn't be, but all of this together, it was a lot. It definitely doesn't excuse any of this, but it shows that she fits the mold.
Vandiver's study also spoke to common behaviors she had observed in female offenders. Often they would buy their victims gifts, befriend them, condone behaviors others disapproved of, encourage the victims to spend time with them instead of friends or family, and demand secrecy. It is truly disturbing how much Kelly's actions align with this pattern, but that wasn't all. Vandiver also engaged with victims in her study, tracking how they behaved in response to what they suffered through. Often when the offense begins, the victims suffer negative consequences like lowered self-esteem, which externalized through troublesome behaviors like stealing, skipping school, running away, etc. And most relevant for this case, Vandiver emphasized in her research that victims did not age out of this dynamic of groomer and victim when they turned 18. That power dynamic would be sufficiently ingrained to persist into adulthood. However, to the defense's team's surprise, the judge did not allow Vandiver to testify. He said because she never met Kelly or Christian, she could not speak to whether the relationship had met the criteria. Furthermore, he said that it seemed she planned to offer a psychological opinion, and she wasn't qualified to do so as she wasn't a psychologist. Consequently, a major part of the defense's argument against the death penalty was not heard by the jury.
However, the defense was permitted to use several other witnesses and types of evidence to attempt to prove that Kelly had in fact groomed Christian. First, they presented pictures of Christian at 14 years old and Kelly at 36 to illustrate the age gap between the two of them. They held the two pictures up for the jury, and defense attorney Michelle Esparza said, quote, "This is Kelly Cifuentes, and this was Christian Olsen when they met. This woman had an inappropriate relationship with this boy, and he was vulnerable at the time, and she led him right into the gates of hell. It was a slow process, but it was very damaging," end quote. Christian's parents backed up the defense attorney. On the stand, Christian's mother said that Kelly stole her son. It was like having him kidnapped, which is what I said. She said it was at such a young age, and you expect your teenager to rebel, but you don't expect to lose your child. His parents described through tears how they had tried repeatedly to stop the relationship and failed.
Christian's father said, "I am really heartbroken. I am a peaceful man, and I've always taught peace in my life. It is just not right. If there was ever something I could do to prevent it, I would. I am the father of 2 children. I am supposed to be the guardian of my children in my household, and this happened."
Christian was actually adopted, and his birth mother, who had no contact with him since she put him up for adoption at 2 weeks old, made a heartfelt plea for his life. She said, quote, "I apologize for what he has done, but I beg of you guys, if you can find it in your heart to spare his life," end quote. That really does pull at my heartstrings as a mother, but I'm torn because he clearly knew right from wrong. So it's really hard to be in that position as a juror or just as a judge in this courtroom.
Finally, the defense also attempted to prove that Christian had not truly acted alone, that he had only carried out Kelly's long-laid plans. They referenced one moment in a police interview in which Christian said, "we," when he spoke about his actions, and they reminded the jury that Kelly had no alibi for the times of either murder. They also tracked down a coworker of Kelly's who said Kelly mentioned wanting to kill her mother years ago in 2003 or 2004. Wow. However, the judge did not permit this coworker's testimony because they considered it hearsay. But no matter what the defense presented, it was impossible to negate the horror and brutality of the murders, which became the central point of the prosecution's push for the death penalty. The prosecution emphasized the brute force of the murders, how Christian had crushed Etta Jean's voice box, the 25 blows to her head, how Geraldine's skull was cracked and caved into her brain. It's a lot to hear, and it's almost impossible to be sympathetic to someone after hearing those details.
Yeah, I'm swayed when I think of that. Like, okay, yeah, you could have had a bad childhood. It's like, who hasn't had something traumatic and just devastating happen to them? But that doesn't mean you go and kill someone and you know right from wrong.
The prosecution also attacked the defense's allegations that Christian had been groomed by Kelly.
Now, this I found to be a little over the top because they said it wasn't uncommon for a 14-year-old boy to have sex and that any young boy would be, wait for it, grateful to a woman for wanting to have sex with them. I cannot even imagine someone saying that. It's disgusting. And I know they wanted to win their case, but to imply that a victim of childhood violations and clear grooming felt gratitude towards the person violating them is beyond the pale, in my opinion. They also pressed on the fact that Kelly did not send Olsen down a bad path, that he had lied to his parents as young as 10 and started stealing by 12 before he even met Kelly. But lying and what we're dealing with at this point are so very different.
Extremely different. Shane Phelps also wanted to make sure the jury knew that Christian had not committed these murders for Kelly, but for his own financial gain. Phelps said, quote, "It was easier for this defendant to make the decision to brutally kill a defenseless 68-year-old woman instead of doing something like going out and getting a job," end quote. He showed video footage of Christian using Etta Jean's credit cards at stores and the receipts from that day. One of the receipts from the day of Etta Jean's murder, in addition to cleaning supplies, included snack food. Phelps said Christian was so racked with guilt that he bought snacks to clean up the body.
He's being sarcastic.
Right.
He's like, he was so racked with guilt, like, and then he's snacking. Kind of reminds me of that girl who pretended that the little boy got kidnapped. And she went under the highway, and then she bought like snacks at Target, and then she hid. Remember that girl?
I do.
I can't think of her name, like Carrie something. Anyway, I'm sure the comments will tell us who it was.
The jury deliberated much longer on the punishment, taking somewhere between 5 to 10 hours to decide whether Christian should get life in prison or the death penalty. But in the end, the jury of 4 men and 4 women sentenced Christian to death by lethal injection for the murder of Etta Jean Westbrook.
Were any of you surprised? I'd like to hear your thoughts in the comments as usual. And as the verdict was being read, the entire courtroom was silent. Christian stood with his lawyers, staring straight ahead. His expression was just blank. One of the jurors was asked after the trial if Kelly's grooming of Christian had impacted their decision, and he said, quote, "I don't think it factored into the decision at all," end quote. Etta Jean's family was happy with the verdict. They thought justice had been served. I just want you to wait because we are not done yet. I know this sounds like we're wrapping up and everything's, just wait. At the conclusion of Etta Jean's murder trial, the state canceled the trial for the murder of Geraldine Lloyd because, in the words of the state prosecutor, Christian Olsen has received the death penalty, and there doesn't seem to be much sense in bringing a death row inmate back in to pursue another case when he's already received a death penalty. So I understand that, but it does also feel like you've just kind of thrown that person's life away. Like there's nothing to show that this person, is being punished for it. Phelps added that there was no statute of limitation on murder cases, so if for any reason they decided to hold a trial for Geraldine in the future, they could. Now, I said in the beginning of this episode that this is a complicated case, and I do respect the jury's decision. What Christian did was horrific, and he bears the blame for his actions. He entered Etta Jean's home. He held the railroad spike. He stole that beautiful woman's life. He left her mutilated body on the floor of her living room and went on a shopping spree with her credit cards. He likely killed Geraldine Lloyd, a woman who had opened her home to him, and he likely buried her body in the backyard and continued living in her house where he murdered her for months, spending her money without any signs of remorse. Etta Jean and Geraldine deserve justice. But what was done to Christian when he was only a child was also horrific. And yet Kelly, now 42-year-old woman, exactly my same age at the time, was lurking in the shadows for each of these murders. A manipulated child predator was not on trial for murder. No, Kelly didn't go to trial. She got a plea deal, 30 years in exchange for pleading guilty to criminal conspiracy to commit murder. Guess when she was eligible for parole?
When?
7.5 years. That's it.
Wow. Well, you might say there's no evidence that Kelly took part in either of these murders. Christian admitted to it, and that's true. Christian absolutely deserved to pay for what he did. But as Kimbyr said, Kelly did too. She groomed and took advantage of a young boy, and then conspired with him to not only kill Etta Jean, but her own mother. She may not have held the murder weapon, but I don't think that makes her any less of a monster.
No, she's just as guilty in my eyes. That's a crime itself to do that to a child, to manipulate them the way that she did. And after Kelly's plea deal, the automatic appeals process for Christian's case began. With any death penalty case, there's an automatic appeals process to ensure that the defendant had received an absolutely fair trial, which makes sense because we're talking about death. Christian and his lawyers appealed this case on 45 counts. The Texas Court of Appeals rejected almost all of them. However, there was one point made in Christian's appeal that the court thought had merit, and that was in regard to the testimony of Donna Vandiver. We've already covered what the doctor planned to testify about. She would have been an essential witness for the defense, helping build their case that Christian was a victim of Kelly's and thus deserved at least some leniency. But the judge did not allow her to testify, so the Texas Court of Appeals found that she should have been allowed to speak. So based on this decision by the court, Christian's death penalty conviction was overturned. Yep, I bet you didn't see that one coming. But maybe some of you actually agree with this.
Now it was just a waiting game. The state had to decide whether to pursue a retrial, where another jury would have the opportunity to sentence Christian to death or sentence Christian to life in prison without a retrial. Shane Phelps, the lead prosecutor on Christian's case, disagreed with the appeals court decision. He said he believed the jury would have reached the same result whether Donna Vandiver testified or not, and to overturn the conviction now only served to upset the victims' families, who might have to endure another trial after everything they've already gone through.
And I can really empathize with that as well. That's really tough. However, in 2009, as the state was beginning to prepare for a retrial, new evidence came to light. Remember I said that it was in 2009 that Kelly confessed to her emotional manipulation and the sexual relationship with Christian, admitting it began when he was only 14 years old. Yes, this is when it came to light and why. Then, even more shockingly, she said that when Christian was 16, she got him addicted to meth before finally soliciting him to kill for her in 2007. On top of this shocking confession, there was some crucial mishandling of DNA evidence by the state that would have likely weakened the prosecution's case if they went back to court. Because of this, the state decided not to pursue the death penalty again. And on Tuesday, February 2nd, 2016, Christian's sentence was changed from death by lethal injection to life in prison with no chance of parole. Here's yet another shocking twist, though. On May 26, 2015, before Christian's sentence was updated, Kelly Cifuentes took her own life in prison. A warning because these details are graphic, so please skip forward if you would rather not hear this, but 6 years into her 30-year sentence, Kelly Cifuentes cut the major arteries in both of her arms and her legs and hung herself with a bedsheet. The 48-year-old was found at 11:30 a.m. in her cell at the Crane unit in Gainesville. Correction officers attempted to save Kelly's life. She was then rushed to a hospital, but the doctors were unable to save her. Her family was notified of her passing at 11:05 p.m. when she was pronounced dead. Self-inflicted deaths are a tragedy, and it's a tragedy that prison systems must deal with all the time, actually, which is actually scary when you think about it. Like, shouldn't they be protecting? But that's a whole other story. Kelly's was the 10th self-inflicted death in Texas prison facility that year. The year before, in 2014, 31 prisoners took their own lives. Some believe that's the best that could happen for these people who have done these terrible things. And they should have done it before they committed the crimes. I hear that all the time. They're like, why don't they just take their own life? Why do they have to take someone else's? Which I completely understand. But I also think that Kelly began to admit things like getting Christian addicted to meth and asking him to kill for her because she wanted to spare him. She never saw his death penalty being overturned. So what I'm saying is I think that she went above and beyond to kind of like sacrifice herself, say like, it's my fault. I gave him meth. I made him commit these crimes for me because she wanted to spare his life.
Kelly's method was particularly brutal, as almost she wanted to make a statement, even in death. I mean, the debate on whether people who commit heinous acts should take their own lives before harming others is a moral quandary. It's easy to say they should, but life isn't black and white. Kelly's final acts of confession might have been a twisted form of redemption to simply another manipulative move.
Yes.
We never truly will know, but I'll leave my own 2 cents here, since I believe, was Kelly also doing meth?
I don't know. They never even talked about that until that moment. She was like, oh yeah, he was on meth.
My thought is if, they were both doing meth and now Kelly was in prison, she's almost likely unable to use that anymore. So her clouded judgment becomes clear and the cold hard truth starts to sink in about her actions.
That's true.
Christian Olsen, now 36, is still in prison. He is incarcerated at the Mark W. Michael unit in Tennessee Colony, Texas, and will spend the rest of his life there with no chance of parole. The remaining members of the Cifuentes and Lloyd families are focusing on trying to heal from the murder of Geraldine and the conviction of Kelly and Kelly taking her own life. While Kirsten Mabry is horrified by her aunt's actions and devastated by the loss of Geraldine, she feels relief that Kelly and Christian were caught so that no one else could be harmed. She said their actions still keep her up at night, tossing and turning, trying to figure out why someone would do what they did. She said, quote, "I truly believe if they were not caught, there would be more victims in their wake," end quote. Tragically, Kevin, who was Kelly and Felix's son and was living in Waco, Texas, died in 2021 at the age of 20 from undisclosed causes.
Wow, so much death. And hopefully Kevin's death will be the last tragedy for the Cifuentes family, who has certainly had more than their fair share of heartbreak. Melissa Cifuentes, against all odds, has found happiness, even though I still think she shouldn't because she knew what was going on, but that's just my opinion. She's married now with 2 kids, and she's living in Austin, Texas. Etta Jean's family still mourns the loss of her every single day, but they've decided to focus on what they can control, which for them is following in Etta Jean's footsteps and passing on the Westbrook way of living, which they define as doing what's right and loving one another. This is a tough case because the primary perpetrator was also a victim himself. They say that hurt people, and I think the murders on Oak Hollow Drive prove that. Felix hurt Kelly, Kelly hurt Christian, and Christian hurt many people. Being hurt does not excuse his horrific, brutal deeds, but it does tell a story about actions and consequences, about how abuse ripples through a family, a neighborhood, a community, leaving a trail of pain in its wake. The families of Etta Jean Westbrook and Geraldine Lloyd know this better than anyone. So if you or someone you know is a victim of anything that we've talked about, there is help available. You can start by contacting this number that we're going to put on the screen, also below in the description box. It's 800-799-7233 or 800-656-4673. Hurting is all too common, but with help, there can be healing as well.
She's right. If you're hurting, please find help.
And thank you so very much for being with us today and hearing these stories.
Until next time.
Bye.